Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Wednesday, October 21st, 2020. And if you're like me, you've heard plenty of people for quite a long time, not just this year, but over the years, referring to the Supreme Court in almost mythical fashion. Who's there is the most important decision of our lifetime. Who chooses who's there is the most important decision of our lifetime. How many people are there is the most important decision of our lifetime and is a make or break thing for the Constitution, which is absurd thinking when you consider the fact that we already live under the largest government in the history of the world. The Constitution has been broken because the people have not enforced it. All of it is absurd. So on this episode, I'm not going to cover the fact that this is primarily due to the court having way more power than the founders had authorized it to have in the Constitution. Instead, even though it does have too much power, this view really is just divorced from the practical reality of what the Supreme Court is able to do in the status quo. Maybe it'll make sense as I go through some of these numbers. First of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is where you can find everything you need to follow this program. All the archives for the last 2+ years. On individual episodes, I always include a bunch of reference links, so the stuff that I'm talking about, you can look in context, read, watch, listen, learn more on your own time. You can find all of the platforms we're on, both the video and audio version. I encourage you, if you haven't followed us at Library, LBRY.TV, library.tv, this is a very censorship-resistant, decentralized platform that's really well, you should just go check us out there. We're currently putting all of our videos there, but we're going to start putting some actual text posts and articles on that platform as well. I think it is the most censorship-resistant platform in existence today. So find all those different platforms, podcasts, etc., plus even our membership program where you can support us for as little as $2 a month. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And while we're here on the live stream and I'm going through a little bit of this intro to give everyone time to get notifications, the platforms do take some time to send those out, allow people to join us here for the live stream. I want to take a quick quick moment and say hello to everyone in the live chat. I'm very grateful for you being here, whether it's live or in the archive. I see Tyler B., Patricia, Justin Morrison, Clay Kent, Brody, Austin, Dixie Strong, it's a cool name, Bob Landry, Dan Reed, always good to see you, Robert Lee, Isaiah Carrillo, up in Alaska. That's pretty cool. And everyone else. I apologize if I missed you, but please do continue leaving comments, whether it's live or in the archive. I read through them later in the day. I reply to a handful when I have time, and I get tons of great ideas for new episodes. Again, thanks for being here. Let's dive right to it. I want to first start out with this poll. I think it's not the definitive statement on this, but it certainly is a recurring theme that we hear. And this was done over at Morning Consult recently, talking about the importance of the Supreme Court. Basically, all people in this poll, they said 56% of them said that the Supreme Court, who is on the Supreme Court, the decision on the Supreme Court is considered very important to them. Now, if you break it down by party, depending on the incumbent in charge, which party's in charge, this tends to flip. So in 2016, it was opposite. So the outside party, it's 60%. And the currently holding party of the White House, it's 51%. The short version is if you add another 10 to 15%, you've got very important and somewhat important. People feel this is a big deal, who is chosen to the Supreme Court. And I understand why people think that, of course, because the Supreme Court has so much power and it can impact so many people. And then through the incorporation doctrine, which is legal fiction created by the court, they force every opinion on all 50 states, basically. Not everyone, but that's basically it. So we're talking about 80 to 85% of people think this is just a real top choice. And what I'm going to make the case for today is that who is on that Supreme Court really isn't going to have much impact, whether they're good people or not, the good or bad, Just the practical reality is they can't even get to the stuff that we're dealing with. There's another poll that was done at Marquette University. I thought I'd mention that because I went to school there for a few years, didn't graduate, that had very similar results. Anywhere from 80 to 90% thought it was very important or pretty important to be able to pick out who on there is going to be on the Supreme Court and how much it's going to impact their lives. Now, here from the Library of Congress, I thought this was interesting. They haven't published a follow-up this since 2013 because I think the end result is there has been no change. And they've got this great blog post that says, frequent reference question. How many federal laws are out there? How many federal laws? And I think some of you who've watched me talk about this very topic in the past, you know where I'm going with this. But here, just from the blog by, it looks like Shamima Rahman, she says, at the reference desk, we are frequently asked to estimate the number of federal laws in force. However, trying to tally this number is nearly impossible. So it's nearly impossible, even for the reference desk at the Library of Congress, to know how many laws are on the books and in force. They say, if you think the answer to this question can be found in the volumes of the statutes at large, you are partially correct. The Statutes at Large is a compendium that includes all the federal laws passed by the U.S. Congress. However, a total count of laws does not account for the fact that some laws are completely new, some are passed to amend existing ones, and others completely repeal old ones. Moreover, this set does not include any case law, legislating from the bench, or regulatory provisions that have the force of law. So how many things can be enforced? So they've got some pictures of book after book after book on multiple shelves here. And they said, in a conversation about this topic, a friend asked me, well, what about the U.S. Code? The current code, and this was as of 2013, it's gotten much larger since then, has 51 titles in multiple volumes. It would be very time-consuming to go page by page to count each federal law, and it also does not include case law or regulatory provisions. Short version is they don't even know at the Library of Congress. They can't even give us an estimate. They won't even give us an estimate of how many laws are on the books. But yet, we, of course, are held accountable, or they would like us to believe we're held accountable anytime they catch us breaking those things, and they can't even count how many there are. Going further, here's another take from a guy named Dave Powell that same time, and he says, by the 1980s, there were 50 volumes of laws. 50 volumes with over 23,000 pages. He says, new laws mean new crimes. From the start of 2000 through 2007, Congress had created at least 452 new crimes. 452 new crimes in just 7 years. So that at the time, the total number of federal crimes exceeded 4,450. 4,500 crimes on the books as of 2007. In a typical year, he writes, this is again Dave Powell, Congress passes at least 125 new laws. I actually think this is a bit of an understatement. I'll get back to that in a bit. 125 would be one of the lowest. But Congress has, in a typical year, actually, because they're 2 years for each congressional session. But Congress has fortunately slowed the pace of late. Well, this will make a little bit more sense in a bit. Here from Wikipedia, they actually give a list of the laws passed. You can't compile them, but they list them by Congress. They say this is a chronological but still incomplete list of federal legislation. I think the people will probably compile this much faster than the government. I think the government likes it when people are ignorant of the law because they say ignorance of the law is no excuse, but yet they're mostly ignorant of the Constitution as the founders and ratifiers gave us, and that's their excuse all the time. Congress, they write, has enacted approximately 200 to 600 statutes during each of its 115 biennial terms, so that more than 30,000 statutes have been enacted since 1789. 30,000 statutes have been enacted. And mind you, each of those often come with a bunch of regulations, and those regulations also have the force of law. It's literally just nuts. We can break it down. There's a whole table here from govtrack.us, which is a really good resource if you want to look into anything legislative-wise, and they break it down by each Congress. We're currently in the 116th, which started in January of 2019, and it goes till January of 2021, and this is actually some of the lowest numbers we've seen in ages. So a divided Congress is always better. Always better, because we want them to pass less stuff. Now, mind you, I would take the position, and I don't even know what they've passed of these 172 enacted laws that have been signed by the president or allowed to become law without a signature. I don't think any of those have happened. But 172, I would say pretty easily 171 of those are probably a violation of the Constitution as ratified by the people of the several states. The 115th Congress, that was from 2017 to 2019 when we had basically uniparty government. Now you see what happens, because just because the so-called smaller government side is in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, that doesn't mean anything as far as enacting new laws. In fact, it speeds up, because in the previous 2 years of the last administration, it was 329. And then as soon as you get uniparty, it goes to 443. That's probably what will happen when we get a new trifecta. It'll go way, way up. And you can go back and scroll all the way through this. And you can note that way back there, 70s and further back, that the numbers get pretty high. Now, they didn't pass as big of bills back then. So if you think of things like the Patriot Act, the Affordable Care Act, and things like that, you really have a bunch of things all included into one, with a lot of regulatory things that have the force of law, but they may have only passed one new statute out of it, or amended a handful of them that were already on the books. Years ago, starting like World War II, where they really started tabulating this data, they would have much smaller pieces of legislation and more things being signed into law. So the numbers are a little interesting in regards to that. But going further, here's an interesting article by Matt Vespa over at townhall.com. And he says there are at least, and now this is a couple years later from the last stats that I quoted you, there are at least 5,000 federal criminal laws, with 10,000 to 300,000. I mean, it is so out of control that no one knows what is going on. And if that isn't a stark example of why we have such a huge problem today, I don't know what is. And I'll tie this back to the Supreme Court in a few. So 5,000 federal criminal laws with 10,000 to 300,000 regulations. I mean, that's a wide range that can be enforced criminally. In fact, he writes, our entire criminal code has become a leviathan unto itself. No one can know when they're violating the law. And in 2003, he writes, there were only 4,000 offenses that carried criminal penalties. So went from 4,000 to 5,000. 2013 had gone up 21% to 4,850. The code has become so big, he writes, that the Congressional Research Service and the American Bar Association simply do not have enough staff to adequately categorize every law we have on the books. Now, what about those regulations? I know a lot of people believe that the president has got this kind of 2-for-1 deal and they're cutting back on regulations, and even though there were 10,000 to 300,000 regulations that had potential to be enforced criminally, those are all getting cut back. We're being deregulated. This is propaganda. Now, there's a really good report that Cato did, and I don't always cite Cato, but sometimes they do really good research. And on this one, they have one covering the regulatory impact of what's going on. And the positive is, just the short version, the positive is there have been some deregulatory actions, and there are far fewer new regulations happening, but there are still a ton of them. A crap load of these things happening, even under the deregulation that we're supposedly getting under the current administration. And just this one chart that I've pulled up on the screen, I will link to the full PDF so you can read the whole document, which has got a lot of info at your own time, your own convenience. But for example, the current administration, we've had 4,310 new regulations. 1,000 are considered significant and 90 are considered major. That's way less. I mean, it's 90 new, right? but that's still 90 new major regulations. There have been 243 deregulatory actions, so 243 things that have been deregulated, but there's 90 new ones, 1,000 significant new ones, 90 major new ones, 1,000 significant new ones, and 4,300 new ones in total under the current administration in one term. So this is the first 24 months. Now, compared to the first 24 months, actually not one full term, but the first 24 months, so just 2 years of that first term, we have 4,000 new regulations. There's no way to keep up with this. How many of them can be enforced? The people who are enforcing them probably don't even know what they are. They just arrest and prosecute or whatever. They've got anybody they want to go after, they can find something as an excuse to go after them. The previous administration, the amount of new regulations was 6,700 in that same period. Significant regulations was 2,000. So yes, there are less, absolutely. But when you're talking about regulations, spending, national debt, military budgets, things like that, we're often sold this lie, this piece of propaganda garbage, that just because they've slowed the rate of increase, they're cutting. So we hear this in regards to the National Defense Authorization Act all the time. If anyone proposes even a 10% cut in the rate of growth from 700, instead of 700 billion, they wanted to do 800 billion. So they cut off 10%, but they still had an increase. So they're still increasing over the previous year. They're just cutting the rate of increase. People go nuts, say we're gutting the military, no one cares about security and all that other garbage. And now we get the similar type of thing in regards to regulation and so-called deregulation. We've got 4,300 new regulations in the first 24 months. In comparison to almost 6,800 from the previous administration. So that's significantly less, and I think that's an improvement, but the bottom line is there are 4,300, even under the so-called deregulator, there's 4,000, and that was with a trifecta from that party in Congress, still 4,300 new ones, and 1,000 significant ones. That's about the same as far as the major ones go as the Bush administration, too. It was about 100 to 90. So short version is, there's tons of new regulations. It goes on all the time. A lot of these can be criminally enforced. No one can keep track of them to the point. And this is a great review of the book here over at the Mises Institute by Wendy McElroy back in 2011. She's talking about a book that I haven't read yet, but it has been recommended to me over and over the years. I do have it on my list to check it out, and I know a lot of people that I respect think it's an incredible book, but we're talking about 3 felonies a day. And here's how Wendy put it over at Mises.org. If you reside in America and it is dinner time, or I guess breakfast or lunchtime at this point, you have almost certainly broken the law. In his book, 3 Felonies a Day, civil liberties lawyer Harvey Silvergate estimates that the average person unknowingly breaks at least 3 federal criminal laws every single day. Now, I'm not sure if he's just talking about and at 2011, it was probably about 4,500 criminal statutes on the book. Now, is he even counting the regulatory issues, the regulations that had criminal enforcement? I don't know. Maybe someone who's read it has a better grasp on that than I do. But Wendy goes further. She says this toll does not count an avalanche of other laws. For example, misdemeanors or civil violations such as disobeying a civil contempt order, all of which confront average people at every turn. So in other words, there are just a countless amount of laws, and we are all breaking them all the time. The system is unwieldy, and using the system itself isn't going to change the system. Here from the Supreme Court website, they've got a FAQ page that I think is pretty interesting. I don't know why I can't close this thing here. There we go. They have a question there that says, how many cases are appealed to the court each year? And how many cases does the court hear? This is a simple numbers game here. If we're getting 4,000 new regulations, we're getting 150 to 200 new laws, 250 new laws per year, and then the court takes a certain amount of cases, can they even slow what's happening? Can they stem the tide? And I'm going to make the case here, I think, with just 2 numbers that will tell you it is impossible, and it makes no difference whatsoever. The court, this is from the Supreme Court itself, they receive approximately 7,000 to 8,000 petitions for a writ of certiorari, assert. I can never get that word right. Latin is not my strength. 7,000 to 8,000 petitions each term. The court grants and hears oral argument in about 80 cases. 80 cases per term is their average. Let's say they somehow tripled that. A bunch of old politically connected lawyers who got a pretty cushy job that are really an oligarchy, making decisions for everyone in the country, the most powerful nation on earth. I don't think they want to triple the amount of work. The rest of us, of course, because of their policies, because of the Federal Reserve, we have to work harder and harder and harder just to make ends meet. But people like that, they definitely don't want to. So let's just say they triple this and they hear oral argument in 240 cases. But if there's 200 to 300 new statutes issued every single year, or every 2 years, 150, and then a lot of those have as many as 10 or 15 potentially criminally enforceable regulations that go with it, made by the agencies somehow empowered to do that, even though delegation is a whole different issue. It's literally impossible. It doesn't matter if you had 9 constitutionalists who believed in the original legal meaning of the Constitution. And mind you, the current nominee told us in the hearings, I only listened to a very short part of it, but told us in the hearings, I tuned in for like 15 minutes and I heard her say that there were super precedents. They were asking her about stare decisis, the idea of precedent. The concern is that precedent so many times holds more weight than the Constitution's legal meaning in and of itself, which is a huge problem. But she told us there were about 4 or 5 super precedents. She kind of stumbled over them, but the 2 of them that really stuck out were, 1, Marbury versus Madison is a super precedent that can never be overturned, and so is the incorporation doctrine. Can never be overturned. So this is not a constitutionalist either. In fact, even if they shouldn't be overturned, the notion that they are a precedent that is untouchable shows me that she believes that precedent is more important than the original legal meaning of the Constitution, because she's telling us that even if it has been presented to her that there is evidence otherwise, they are super precedents. Now, mind you, I've read the Constitution. I've read a lot of the ratification debates, a lot of the Philadelphia Convention notes. I've never heard of anything called super precedent at all. But anyways, the court hears a total of about 80 cases. 80 cases. Now, they don't strike down 80 federal laws or 80 federal regulations every time. It is much, much smaller than that. And here from Jonathan Adler, who is actually citing research from Keith Whittington in Repugnant Laws. He says, here's the average of the amount of federal statutes that are invalidated, or an opinion of the court saying that they're unconstitutional, per annum. This is going all the way back to the Warren Court, which is 1950 or 53, somewhere around there. So 60 plus years, almost 70 years now, this is the average, and it's very consistent. The Warren Court was 2.57 per annum. Berger Court, 3.17, Rehnquist Court, 3.63, and the Roberts Court is the most rubber stamp of them all, 2.08. So the average since 1950 or so has been, we'll just give them, they've had 3 per year that are held to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Now, if you take that 3 per year and the 80 that they consider, and the fact that they're passing 150 to 250 per year, depending on the makeup of Congress and the White House, even if it's only 100 per year. And then you're talking about thousands upon thousands of new regulations per year. Who is sitting on the court isn't going to stem the tide. There is a much larger problem, and I've covered that in other episodes, strategy of how to deal with federal acts that violate the Constitution. Of course, we've been told by Madison, Jefferson, Patrick Henry, James Otis, Samuel Adams, and so many others, John Dickinson, how do you deal with federal acts outside of the Constitution, outside of what's authorized them? You don't wait for that same government to tell you that they've changed their mind, or part of that government says the other part of the government is wrong, and then, of course, now you can start following the Constitution, people. When you allow the government to determine the extent of its own powers, which is what we're talking about here, that power will grow no matter who's in charge, no matter what political party's in charge, and no matter who is sitting on the Supreme Court. And at the end of the day, going to the federal courts to protect yourself from the federal government isn't just bad strategy. It's an almost impossible one. It's a numbers game. The number of new laws, the new regulations being added to the books is way more than the workload that they could even consider feasibly. It's just impossible. So no matter who sits on the bench, the federal government will continue to grow. Doesn't matter who gets nominated. Doesn't matter who wins in the election coming up or in the following one. My prediction remains the same as it has always been. I got this from the late, great Harry Brown. The size and scope of the federal government in 4 years, unless people change their strategy and how they deal with the federal government, will certainly be bigger than it is today. People need to learn how to exercise their rights, whether the federal courts give them permission to or not. Those numbers, I think, are a real important part of it. It really is a big deal, and it gives us perspective. So if you're spending all of your time debating about some vague answers and vague political grandstanding questions to a potential nominee to the Supreme Court, if you're spending all of your time worrying about who is going to do that nomination, I think you're putting a lot of time, energy, potentially money in a black hole that can't. It is logistically impossible to stop things. People have to take a little bit more aggressive actions in order to deal with that. We cover the strategies that the founders gave us in our annual State of the Nullification Movement report, which you can get over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. Clay Kent with an awesome quote, Pink Floyd, we can make this into a monster if we all pull together as a team. Going a little further in the live chat, just want to see if there's any other questions I can... Oh, yeah, Robert Lee Clark. So scary that our court can't even keep up to stop legislators from abusing power. Sickening. Yeah, I mean, that is, I think the problem is that so many people, Robert, have been relying on it. And as long as you spend all of your time worrying about who's going to be on the court rather than coming up with strategies to deal with the thousands and thousands of laws and regulations already on the books and how to deal with those, then those numbers are going to continue growing. So we're putting all of our energy and time and money into the wrong place. And again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/report. It's a free download. It's a full, basically ebook. It's basically a white paper that we do every year or so. So 108 pages. You don't have to sign up for it. Just download it for your Kindle, for your Apple device, for your Android device, or a PDF. And the first half of it goes over the strategy, the legal, historical, constitutional basis, and in practice of resisting unconstitutional federal actions, as we call nullification. The second half gives a number of examples through like 10 different main themes of how it's being put into place today. We need way more of this and way less spending all day arguing about a nominee to an institution that can't, even if it were great, can't get the job done just because of the numbers game. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope you found it educational. I hope it riled you up to take some action. Whatever it may be, I really appreciate you being here. If you like the show, please smash the like button. Leave us a review on iTunes or any other podcast platform. Hit subscribe, comments, all that stuff. Feel free to email me, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, with any questions or ideas or suggestions. I'm happy to hear all of those. And of course, if you support the show, you want to get behind us financially. I see a bunch of people who are members, and I couldn't be more grateful for your financial support. There's no way we could do this day in and day out, reaching new people all the time without that. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great Wednesday, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.